solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, counsel, the court made a determination that this particular witness is not subject to the court's exclusionary order, so you can inquire on direct, Mr. Wixon.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, will you please state and spell your full name for the record?
My name is Jason Gwilliam, Jason Gwilliam.
And where do you live?
I live in Springville, Utah.
How long have you lived there?
I've lived there approximately 28 years.
Are you related to Chad Daybell?
I am related to Chad Daybell.
Can you tell the jury how?
I married Samantha Gwilliam, who is Tammy Daybell's sister, making Chad and I brother-in-laws.
How long have you been brother-in-law?
I married Samantha in 1995, so about 28 years.
During the time that you've been married to Samantha, have there been a number of years that you've lived around Chad Daybell and Tammy Daybell and their family?
Yes.
About how many years did you live in the same community as them?
When my wife and I were first married, we spent approximately 2 years, year and a half in Cedar City. And Chad and his family at that time were in Ogden. We moved into Springville. Well, I'm going to go on and say about 26 years. We moved into Springville in the winter of 96. And I think they moved in shortly after that in 97. So from 1997 until they moved to Idaho.
When did they move to Idaho?
Moved to Idaho in 2015.
So 18 years, does that sound right?
Yes.
When they moved to Springville, did you live in the same neighborhood?
When they first moved in, we actually lived across the street from each other. After that, sequentially, we moved around the corner. We were probably within a block for that entire time.
Can you explain to the jury kind of the nature of the relationship? How often did you have interaction with Chad and his family?
We would have interaction with them. It wasn't uncommon for at least once or twice a week. In Chad and I's case, probably sometimes 3 to 4 times or more a week.
Did you go to the same church?
We did attend the same church.
Did you and Chad ever spend any time working together?
We did spend some time working together. Chad and I had opportunity throughout that time to share, I think, at least 3 shop spaces together. And previous to him moving up to Idaho, he and I worked together for 6 months before he went up there.
Could you explain to the jury, do you feel like you are someone who is close to Chad?
I feel like that Chad and I were very close.
Are you aware of any other friends during that time period that Chad had that were maybe closer even than you were?
He had friends from high school. He had other relatives that he had. But it probably wasn't as close as what we were, or I felt we were.
Being relatives and close friends, did you and Chad ever have one-on-one talks or conversations where you might confide in one another?
We had a lot of backing up. We have a lot of talks where we would talk about different issues with regards to family, with regards to religion, with regards to just about anything. And I felt like we had some really deep conversations in regards to a number of things, just as 2 good friends and brother-in-laws would.
Was there ever a time that Chad expressed to you any concerns about his marriage to Tammy?
I don't want to say concerns at that time, but you have your relationships that you have with your spouse, and there are times where you don't always get along. And so we might have discussed and talked about some of that.
Did Chad ever discuss with you his intimacy with Tammy, his wife?
There were times he did.
What in particular would he discuss with you about that?
Object at this point. This isn't relevant.
Sustained.
Was there anything specific in your discussions with Chad that he explained if he had concerns about his relationship with Tammy?
Just in the fact that I think he felt like at times it was a little vanilla. It was a little bland.
What did he mean by, what did he say about that?
Just in certain aspects of the relationship, that it was just a marriage of just, we have a lot of routine, just general routine that we go through.
Did you and Chad share the same religious views, generally speaking?
Generally speaking, while he was in Utah, yes, we did.
Had Chad ever confided in you or shared with you any experiences that he may have had in La Jolla, California?
He did.
Can you explain La Jolla? Yes. Can you explain to the jury what did he tell you about that experience?
Said he had an experience that was a little life-changing in the fact that he was in the ocean. Large wave came in, a lot of rocks, smashed him against the rocks, chewed up his back pretty good. And it was one of those moments that you just don't forget.
And did he also share with you an experience that he had in Flaming Gorge, Utah?
Yes, he did.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. This is becoming leading.
Overruled.
Yes, he did.
Thank you. What was that experience?
Another experience in his youth where he was jumping off cliffs, and as he hit the water, he felt that his spirit separated from his body and become torn from his body.
Is that something that he'd explained to you originally?
He had talked to me about that.
Judge, could we get some foundation as to time, date?
Sure. Can you let the jury know, when did these conversations occur? What year approximately?
Conversations occurred early 2000s when we would have conversations about that.
And we'll get to it later, but was there a later time that you also discussed these?
We did discuss these later. Yes.
But in the early 2000s is what you're saying as to these two conversations, is
Yes.
that right?
I'm going to have you, Mr. Rickson, as well as you, Mr. Gwilliam, just please slow down a little bit and try not to talk over the top of each other for our record. Thank you.
Sure. At some point in time, did Chad's religious views change?
I believe they did.
Let's first explain to the jury, when did you first start seeing this kind of a change?
I would say at the time he started writing his books.
Can you pin it down to an approximate year?
If I were to put an approximate year to it, I would say 2006 to 2007.
In what way did his religious views change?
They became more focused, hyper-focused on preparing end of times, things of that nature.
When you use the word hyper-focused, what do you mean by that?
I think as a general rule, most people involved in our religion have a tendency to try to round out the religious information they receive. And in this case, by saying hyper-focused, I would say that it became more of an obsession and more than normal.
At any point in time, during this time frame, did Chad ever express to you a feeling that he had received visions?
He did.
And approximately when did he first start expressing that to you?
Probably around 2010, 2011.
What types of visions did he tell you that he was having?
They were visions regarding how things were going to play out in the last days.
At some point in time, did Chad again visit with you about this experience from Flaming Gorge and La Jolla, California?
Yes, he did.
Did anything about the experiences as he shared them with you change?
Originally, there were experiences that you have that are impactful. They soon became near-death experiences as opposed to just something that was impactful.
Could you explain a little bit more about that to the jury as to what Chad would explain when he couched them as near-death experiences?
Originally, when the stories were told, it was an experience that happened, and then it became an experience that happened in La Jolla, of where I had an experience where I saw a relative that had deceased and passed on. And then the experience in Flaming Gorge became my body and spirit were torn and the veil was ripped and I could see into the heavens and into the eternities.
Was there anything about that change that you were concerned by?
Yeah.
What was that?
That it wasn't consistent, that it just became more of a narrative now.
From that point forward, did you continue to see Chad's religious views change?
I did.
In what way?
It again started focusing more on end times. more on what would happen in America, what would happen with things in the future.
When did he first start expressing his views on those things?
That would have been around 2013, 2014.
And could you be a bit more specific about the nature of what he was telling you?
He got involved with other authors. They started to publish books and write books. They would talk about, in particular,
Judge, I'm going to object at this point unless there's some foundation that establishes how he knows this rather than this narrative.
Sustain.
Can you just isolate your comments to things that you heard directly from Chad?
Chad Daybell told me there would be 2 earthquakes that would happen. There would be the Wasatch wake-up quake.
And Judge, could I have some foundation as to when this discussion supposedly took place?
He's like,
Is that an objection?
That's an objection,
Prior-
Judge.
Overruled.
go ahead, please.
These conversations started in 2013, 2014, and continued on until he left to go to Idaho and continued on past that.
And I think before we had an objection, I'd ask you to explain to the jury kind of the nature of the things he was telling you that about his change in view.
I was informed that there would be earthquakes, that there would be destruction in America. I was informed that there would be invading troops that would come from various different countries into the Americas.
Did those views that he shared with you, did they cause you any concern?
Sure.
In what way?
Well, it's a fear tactic.
What do you mean by
Judge, I'm going to object. Calls for speculation.
Overruled.
You may continue.
In my opinion, it's a fear tactic. It's a way to let people know I know more than you, and therefore you should listen to me.
Why did you perceive it that way?
I perceived it that way because when you bring up anything on a natural disaster, it has a tendency to create fear. When you bring in wars and rumors of wars, it creates fear.
Eventually, I think you said Chad and his family moved to Idaho.
Yes,
And what year was that again?
2015.
At the time that he moved, had he invited you to move with him?
He had.
Can you explain to the jury how that request went and why he was asking you to come?
Towards the end of 2015, he expressed his desire for my wife and I and family to move up to Idaho so that we could be in proximity with our families, with each other.
Did he say any more about that?
He felt that it would be good for us to move up there in order to escape the earthquakes and the desolation and the things that would happen in Utah.
What was he telling you about what it would be like in Rexburg?
He said that Rexburg would be a city of light, place of refuge, place that people would want to come to and be at.
And what was your reaction when he asked you to come up?
My curiosity at first was piqued because I wanted to know. I don't want to be in the middle of a giant earthquake. So naturally, I thought, okay, this is something that might be of interest.
Did you take stock in any of his visions? Did you believe any of those things?
Originally, yes, I did.
At that time, were you still embracing maybe some of what he was teaching?
During that time frame, yes.
So why did you eventually not move up to Idaho?
Didn't feel it was right.
Any specific reason why?
There were things that were going on that to me, it didn't feel right. We had opportunity to visit. Idaho's a beautiful place and a great place for some. It just, for us, wasn't going to be a place that we needed to be at.
Did you tell Chad no, you weren't going to move?
We did.
Did he ever ask you to come up again?
He did.
How often would he ask?
Are you looking specifics or generality?
Well, generality first, then we'll go to specifics.
Generality, just whenever we could. And we did go visit. We had opportunity to go attend family functions and events up there.
Did he ever ask again for you and your family to move to Idaho?
There was a letter that was written to me
When was that letter written?
in 2016.
And that was a letter from who?
That was from Chad.
What did he say in that letter?
In that letter, he essentially told me that we needed to be in Idaho.
Did he say why he believed that?
He said we needed to be in Idaho because within the next 3 years, there would be a giant earthquake, that Springville and my house would be shaken to the ground and destroyed, and that we needed to escape that destruction before that happened.
Did he claim that to be part of his visions?
Yes,
Did he say anything about concerns he might have had with your wife?
he did.
What did he say?
He'd informed me that she was allowed to go south and that the spirits, in particular, the dark spirits, would allow her to go south to do whatever she wanted to do, but she was not able to come to Idaho to see the glory and the visions that would happen, and that she more or less was being held back.
What did you take that to mean?
I took that to mean that she was being controlled by dark spirits.
How'd you react to him telling you that or
I wasn't-
expressing that? Sorry.
I wasn't thrilled
Why not?
because I have a responsibility and a stewardship over my family. That's not Chad's responsibility.
Can you explain to the jury that word stewardship as you're using it? What do you mean by that?
When I'd say the term stewardship, stewardship would be an ownership or a responsibility or something of that nature, that is my duty and my job, my responsibility.
You just use the word ownership. Are you suggesting that you feel like you own your family?
I wouldn't say that I own my family, but I have a responsibility to them.
Is the idea of stewardship something that is mainstream to the LDS Church?
Yes.
Why were you offended by Chad's statements about your wife and dark spirits relative to your stewardship?
I felt that he was trying to take a stewardship over my family and trying to tell us what we needed to do and where we needed to be.
Did you express any concerns to Chad about that?
Not at the time.
Did you ever, I'll withdraw that. I think you explained that there were some times after they moved to Rexburg that you would come up and visit them.
Yes.
Was there ever a time that, I'll withdraw that. When you come to visit, what would Chad tell you?
He would, at that time, we didn't talk in depth about any of the different opportunities to come up there because typically there was another event going on. And he would just explain to me how nice it was and just talk about how things are going up there and that things were wonderful.
Did he ever explain any more about his visions of what was going to happen in Rexburg?
He did. He actually invited me to come up on a trip. I took a day trip, went up there and was shown around Rexburg, was taken to BYU, Idaho. I was taken to other various places throughout town.
Do you remember when that trip was?
That trip would have been in 2016. I think it was the spring.
And what kinds of things was he sharing with you as he took you around Rexburg?
He was showing me that this would be a place of city of light, that there would be a refuge for people to come, that it would be a safe haven, areas of where there would be tent cities, areas of where he would expand his property or take his property and turning it into a tent city.
At that point, did you continue to believe or at least be open-minded to his visions as you had been before?
That was probably the first time after I left that I thought, I'm not supposed to be here.
Any reason why you had that thought?
Just my gut feeling of who I am and what I was doing.
Did you ever express that to Chad?
I just told him that I wasn't going to be coming up. That wasn't for us.
I want to stop here for a few moments and talk a little bit about Tammy. Could you just explain to the jury your relationship with Tammy?
I was Tammy's brother-in-law. I thought she was a sweetheart. She was a kind, gentle person that she really had a lot of people's best interest. She wasn't a saint. None of us are, but she was really, truly an amazing person that just loved people. And in particular, was one that would reach out to touch the individual in my.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. It's becoming a bit of a narrative.
Did you get any sense from your interactions with Tammy after they started planning a move to Idaho that this is something that she wanted to do?
Judge, objection, foundation.
I'm asking based on his observations and such, Your Honor.
Overruled.
From what I observed, she wasn't thrilled about going to Idaho.
What made you feel like that without speaking to anything she may have said?
Tammy was a gal that loved to be around her family and liked to be where she was in Springville and had a good relationship with my wife.
Did Tammy also have other family in Springville?
Yes.
Who else was in Springville?
She had cousins, aunts, nieces, and nephews. The majority of my wife's family was there.
And did your family, you and your wife, have a lot of interaction with these extended family members?
Yes.
Did you ever make any observations about the way Chad and Tammy interacted with each other?
I did.
What observations were those?
Some of the observations I had were that they were happy while they were in Springville. They were a loving couple that were kind and nice to each other.
And did that change once they moved to Idaho?
Judge, I'm going to object unless there's some foundation as to how and when he observed the relationship personally.
Same.
Did you have any specific times that you came to Idaho that you observed Chad and Tammy together?
I did.
And when might some of those times have been?
We had opportunity to attend weddings of Chad's children together.
Do you remember approximately what years that happened?
I know there was one in 2018.
Did you make any particular observations in 2018 about Chad and Tammy's interactions with each other?
I felt their interactions were fine and appropriate.
After 2018, during 2018 up until Tammy's passing in 2019, to the best you can recall, can you tell the jury how often were you seeing Chad and Tammy, either in Idaho or Utah?
From what years, excuse me?
The last year of Tammy's life.
We had opportunity to interact with Tammy and Chad at a Christmas party in 2018. After that, the next opportunity that we had to interact with them was in the spring of 2018. They had an opportunity to come down or come to Utah for one of Chad's family functions.
Judge, before an objection, can I voir dire a native objection?
There's no pending questions, so go ahead, Mr. Wixom.
Thank you. Are there other contacts that you had in that last year that you haven't mentioned yet?
Other contacts that we had that I personally had would not be until Tammy's passing.
So in the 2018 interaction, can you describe what that was?
Chad and his family came down, stayed at our residence. We had an opportunity to sit together in a hot tub with my wife, Tammy, Chad, and myself. Interaction was happening, but Chad seemed withdrawn.
What do you mean by that?
He wasn't engaging in the general conversation of the group.
Was that something that was abnormal for you guys when you'd visit together?
I noted it because it was different.
Did you notice that at the time?
I did.
Did you bring it up with anybody or with Chad?
I didn't bring it up with Chad. Didn't have an opportunity to. I noted it with my wife.
Were there any other interactions that you had in 2018 with Chad and Tammy?
Not that wouldn't be constituted as hearsay, so I would have to say no.
When did you first learn of Tammy's passing?
I was down home running errands. My wife called me and informed me that Tammy had passed away.
What was your reaction when you heard that news?
I was stunned.
Why were you so stunned?
I had seen Tammy 2 weeks prior, and it didn't seem that somebody of her age, in her condition, should have passed.
Where had you seen her 2 weeks prior?
Tammy came to my house and stayed with my wife and I.
What was the occasion?
On that occasion, she was coming down to visit family and parents.
And you noted that part of why you were stunned was because of Tammy's condition. Will you elaborate on that for the jury, please?
For what I had observed, she was healthy. She seemed happy. She didn't seem to have anything that would cause her to die. Not that I'm an expert in that.
At that point in time, had you noticed whether or not Tammy had put on any significant weight or lost any significant weight?
I did not feel she had changed.
What did you do once you were processing this with respect to hearing of Tammy's death? What was the next thing that you did?
I returned home and gave my wife a big hug. I was devastated, and you don't know what you can do at that time, but you want to do something. And I was in a position that I felt I could coordinate efforts between Chad's family up north, our family down south, our local church congregation. And so I went to work trying to help plan that while a lot of people were just hurting.
Did you plan that with Chad or did you plan it by yourself?
I didn't plan it. I helped coordinate.
At any point after you heard the news, did you talk to Chad?
Yes, I did.
When was that?
I would say around 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. I don't know the specific time
Of what day?
of October 19th, 2019.
Would that be the day of her passing?
Yes,
And when you say around 11 o'clock, would that be in the morning or in the
in the
evening?
morning.
Did Chad call you or did you call him?
I don't recall. I think I reached out to him.
What kinds of things did you and Chad talk about in that conversation?
We discussed getting in touch with a local mortician where we were at. We discussed getting in touch with the head of the congregation, just arranging the basic things that you would for a funeral.
What, if anything, did he say about his desire for the funeral?
Said he wanted to do it Tuesday, which was a little surprising to me.
Why?
I just felt it was very quick.
Did you talk about the circumstances of Tammy's death?
I asked him what had happened.
What did he say?
He said that he was woken up by her rolling out of bed and that she passed away.
Did you press him for further information?
I just had asked because you want to know what happened, and we talked about it, and the only answer he could give me is, I don't know. I don't know. I left it at that.
In that conversation, did he mention anything about concerns that Tammy had had with her health?
No,
Did he mention any specific ideas that he may have had about her cause of death?
he did not.
And later to that day, oh, let me withdraw that. In that conversation, did the topic of an autopsy come up?
Not between he and I.
Did you get a different call later that day?
I did.
From who?
I got a call from Steve Schultz.
What was that in regard to?
Steve Schultz was the local mortician we were coordinating efforts with. And that was in regards to asking if I would assist him in retrieving Tammy and bringing her back to Springville.
Did you do that?
I did.
When did you do that?
We left the following morning, Sunday, early to go pick up Tammy.
Did you go straight to the house?
We first initially went to the Daybell residence.
Who was there?
There was myself, Steve Schultz, both of Chad's parents, Jack Daybell, Sheila Daybell were there. Garth was there, and Chad was there.
Did you have any conversations at that point with Chad?
I did.
Did you make any observations about his demeanor or mood or any of those things?
My observation was that he seemed relatively normal.
What do you mean by that?
In the fact that we had discussions initially of, I'm sorry you lost her, and general greetings.
And why would that be? What was he doing that was abnormal to you?
The thing that was abnormal was I didn't witness a lot of mourning. I did see both and observe both parents upset. Garth and I had conversation in which Garth expressed him being upset. And I had asked Chad if he was okay, and he said, no, I'm fine. I'm all cried out.
Did you continue to discuss funeral arrangements at that point?
Yes.
What kinds of things in terms of arrangements did you discuss with him?
Just when, where, what the timing would be, things that you would do at the funeral.
Was there anything about his demeanor in that exchange that stood out to you?
I would just say that it would just seemed off. And by that, I didn't feel like at the time, I didn't feel like it was normal when someone lost a spouse, but everybody does grieve differently. And so I didn't think any more about it beyond that.
Was there any more talk with Chad about the circumstances of Tammy's death at that point?
No,
Did you then, did you help Mr. Schultz remove the body and take Tammy to the
we
mortuary?
did. We went from there to the funeral home and picked up Tammy, placed her in the vehicle and proceeded to head south.
Do you feel like at any point during that transport or the transport to Utah, did you get a chance to observe Tammy's body?
I didn't get a chance to observe Tammy's body before transporting. No.
Did you after?
After, I had an observation of just her area from the shoulders up to observe her face.
And when was that opportunity?
That was when we dropped her off at the funeral home.
Did you make any observations about her at that point?
I didn't make any observations other than I wanted to see if she would be or look appropriate enough that my wife might want to help do her hair and makeup.
After taking her to the Utah mortuary, do you recall, did you attend any viewings for Tammy?
I did.
Which viewings did you attend?
There were 2 viewings associated with her funeral. There was one that was on Monday night, and then there was one before the funeral Tuesday morning.
Did you have any interaction with Chad at the one the night before?
I made attempts. We didn't have a whole lot of exchange. He was busy. I was busy. And so I wanted to try to connect with him, but every opportunity I had, we just missed each other.
Was that necessarily unusual given the circumstances?
I don't feel it was unusual with the circumstances. No.
So is it fair to say at that point you didn't have any concerns about?
No, I didn't.
And then did you attend a viewing the following morning?
I did.
Did you interact with Chad at that point?
Maybe small talk, nothing substantial at that time.
Did you have a chance to observe him at that point as well?
I did.
Did you notice anything during that interaction that caused you any concern?
The family prayer, which is customary at a religious event that we have with a funeral, seemed a little off. He was really shaky and very unsure on his feet and almost just seemed different.
Could you expound on that? When you say off and different, what do you mean?
He was rocking back and forth and side to side and giving the prayer and not crying, but trying to cry was what I felt.
Did you hear the words of his prayer?
I did, but I couldn't recall them right now.
Anything besides what you just explained at the viewing that caused you any concern?
No, I did have a chance to observe Tammy in her coffin at various times, and she seemed at rest, peaceful.
And you attended the funeral.
Yes.
Did you make any observations about Chatter's behavior during the funeral?
During the funeral, I was watching one of their grandchildren in the back, and so I did not have opportunity to observe as much as I might like to, and so I did not.
And then after the funeral, did you attend, was there a family luncheon held?
There was.
Where was that held at?
That was held at the same place that we had the funeral.
Was that directly after the funeral or what time frame?
After the funeral, we proceeded to the cemetery where she was interned. And we were there for what I felt like was longer than normal. Considering everybody wanting to visit, I thought, okay, this is fine. We'll stick around for a while. And then after that is when the luncheon occurred down at the church.
Anything that stood out in your mind at the luncheon?
At the luncheon, we all arrived at the church. And while we were there, We were there for probably 25 to 30 minutes waiting for Chad to arrive. Didn't want to start, felt it might be inappropriate if he was not there. And I finally had a phone call that he informed me that he was still running behind and that we should just go ahead and get started without him.
I don't know if I missed this, but did you say how long it took for him to eventually get to the luncheon?
I didn't mention it, but I would say probably an additional 15 minutes.
So how late was he for that?
From the time that we arrived until he arrived, I would have to guess approximately 45 minutes.
Did that cause you any concern?
It didn't seem concerning per se, other than we did want to visit. We did want to have some interaction and talk with him.
Did you get that opportunity?
I did not.
Did you try?
I did.
What was the response from Chad?
The response was, we have a memorial to do tomorrow. We're going to have to load everybody up and we got to go back to Idaho. I felt it was pretty abrupt in the exit.
Was that unusual given the long history you had with Chad and his family?
Given the long history, I felt it was unusual.
After Tammy's funeral, did you notice any change or difference in terms of the relationship that you had with Chad and with his children?
He had taken off for a time. And so immediately after the funeral, within the first 30 days, not necessarily, but I didn't know what to expect following the death of a close loved one.
And if we could help the jury understand, how close were you, if you were at all, with Chad's children before the funeral?
Before the funeral, it wasn't uncommon if we wanted to reach out, text message or phone call to have interaction and conversation with them.
When you said you attended weddings earlier in Rexburg, was it for Chad's children?
Yes.
So did you regularly attend their life events?
We would make every effort that we could.
And the time that they lived in Springville with you, would you say that you had a close relationship or not?
We did, yes.
So how did that relationship change once the funeral was over? Not necessarily immediately, but in the days and weeks following.
The relationship changed primarily after we had learned of other things that had gone on.
We'll come back to that. At some point after the funeral, did you ever reach out to Chad?
I did.
When was that?
I remember reaching out to him approximately 30 days later to call to see how he was doing. I understood that he had spent some time in Hawaii, and I just wanted to do a follow-up to check in on him to see how he was doing with his wife's passing.
What kinds of things did Chad explain to you in that conversation?
In that conversation, I was informed, or I was actually asked, have I been speaking with Heather Daybell? That was the first thing he mentioned on the phone call.
Did you find that unusual?
Yes, I did.
Why?
Because I wanted to talk to him and not about Heather Daybell.
And so the jury understands, was Heather Daybell someone that you had a close relationship with?
No.
How are you related to Heather Daybell, just to put it in perspective?
To put it in perspective, Chad's brother Matt married Heather, making her Chad's sister-in-law. And so at these family functions, if it was extended, we would see her. We were cordial. I didn't have anything against her, but we weren't close by any means.
Did you ever, in that phone call that you made to Chad a month after the funeral, did you ever ask him why he was asking if you talked to Heather?
Conversation was such that he asked if I had been talking to Heather Daybell, and I said no. He had said, well, she's spreading rumors about me in Rexburg, Idaho. So I asked why. And he said, well, it's not important, but while I was in Hawaii, I got married.
Was that the first time that you learned that he'd been married?
Yes.
Were you surprised by that?
Very.
Why?
Because it is not common to marry somebody. At that time, I thought within a month, maybe, of a wife passing, when he was as close as he was to his spouse.
Did you find it in any way unusual or not with respect to the fact that all this history of years of closeness with Chad, that he hadn't told you before this that he got married?
We hadn't had opportunity to talk, so this is the first opportunity to talk. I'm not surprised that that was what he would tell me.
How did you react to that when he said that?
I remember literally standing there and just not knowing what to say.
Did you eventually speak?
Yes, I did.
What did you say to him and ask him about?
I asked him the first thing that came to my mind, which is, who is she?
What did he say?
He told me her name was Lori Ryan.
Had you ever heard that name before?
I had not.
Did he tell you in that conversation when he had married Lori Ryan?
In that conversation, he did not. He just explained who she was.
Did he describe her in any way, tell you anything about her?
He did.
What kinds of things did he tell you?
He explained that she was 5'6", 120 pounds, blonde, worked out, physically fit, hairdresser, and just an amazing individual.
Did he mention anything about her family background?
He had mentioned that her husband had died of a heart attack earlier in 2019.
Did he say anything about her children, if she had children or didn't have children?
I asked him if he had children, and he said that she had some grown children, but that was it.
At that point, had you ever heard of JJ and Tylee's names?
No.
Anything else in that conversation that stood out to you?
In particular, nothing that was of note other than I was still trying to process that he had been married, and I wanted to know when he had gotten married, but he had not shared that with me.
In the days that followed, did you have another conversation with Chad?
We did.
When was the next conversation?
The next conversation was a day or two later. I'm not specific on what day it was.
And what was that conversation about?
The conversation for me was mainly trying to find out information of when did you get married?
So did you call him? Did he call you?
I called him.
Did you call and ask him that question?
I did.
What did he say?
He informed me at that point that he had been married on November 5th.
Did he say anything else about his marriage?
Not a lot about the marriage itself.
I want to back up. Back on November 19th, did Chad ever ask you to do anything about this information that he'd been married?
You know, when he did share that information with me, the one item that was a little surprising was that he asked me not to tell anybody.
Did he give you an explanation as to why he didn't want you to tell anybody?
He just said, don't let anyone know. And I informed them he needed to call our in-laws and let them know. And he just didn't give him information. He didn't give a reason.
So then going forward to that phone call, and you had a couple of days later, did he say anything about how his kids had reacted to the marriage?
He did. What
did he say?
He informed me that his kids knew that he was going to be getting married before he went to Hawaii.
And what was your thought at that point?
My thought was, and I did ask him, how did they keep that a secret? And one of the answers the answer troubled me because he said, my kids are good at keeping secrets.
Did he explain what he meant by that at all?
No, he didn't.
Was there anything else of note in that particular conversation?
I wouldn't say there was anything of note. I was just still trying to process that I learned the date of the marriage, which was roughly 2 weeks after the funeral. And I just remember in my mind thinking, that's incredibly quick. I didn't feel it appropriate.
When's the next time in your memory that you had contact with Chad?
The next time we had contact with Chad was the day, I want to say it was the day that Tammy was exhumed.
And how did that contact occur?
Contact occurred where he reached out and sent me a text message telling us that he needed to speak with me and my wife, Samantha.
And did you talk to him?
We did.
Did you call him? Did he call you?
I think that when my wife returned home that she reached out on her phone and put us on speakerphone with him.
Do you recall at least approximately when the day that Tammy was exhumed?
I want to say it was the 13th of December, but I could be wrong.
So when you spoke to him on this occasion, what specifically did you talk about?
There were more conversation between him, my wife, and he, as there was to he and I. However, we were all on a speakerphone together, and it was a conversation in which he had asked us if we had known that Tammy was exhumed and had we been responsible for that.
And I just want to invite you in these questions, just speak to what you heard from Chad, not what your wife may have said, okay?
Sure, of course.
So what did he say about it, if anything?
He wanted to know if we knew that she had been exhumed. He wanted to know if we had any responsibility for her being exhumed. And in both cases, we did not. We did not know anything about it.
Did he explain at all why he wanted to know if you had responsibility for that?
No.
What else did he ask or say to you?
During that conversation, there was a lot, but I probably couldn't testify to much of that at this point.
Did he have any comments that he made to you in regard to Tammy in that conversation?
He did have conversation regarding Tammy.
What did he say about Tammy?
In conversation regarding Tammy, the thing that stood out was that he had mentioned the day of the funeral that she had appeared to him and told him that it was time to move on.
How did you take that?
I took it to mean that if she did have conversation and told him it was time to move on, that likely it didn't mean within 2 weeks.
Why did he mention that? Was there any reason in that conversation?
I don't know why he mentioned that.
Did Heather's name come up again in that phone call?
In that phone call, I don't know. I can't testify that did or not.
Your Honor, given the time, does the court want me to continue or do we stop for a break?
You can continue on another 5 or 10 minutes, Mr. Wixom. Thank you.
Thank you. At some point in time after that, did you ever get a call from law enforcement?
Yes, I did.
When did that occur?
That occurred approximately December 18th, 2019.
And do you remember who it was that contacted you?
I don't specifically remember, but that they requested they wanted to meet with me.
And did you do that?
We did. Yes, I did.
Where did you meet with them at?
I met with them at the Springville Police Department.
Did they explain to you what they wanted to meet with you about?
Not until I arrived.
When you got there, what was your understanding of what this was about?
When I arrived, my understanding was that there were 2 missing kids that were affiliated with Lori and Chad,
What were the names of the kids that you learned about?
JJ and Tylee.